Before proceeding, I want to warn you all that the events I am about to narrate might be too frightening for some. So, do not watch this video alone, as today I am going to tell you about Herb Baumeister. Before Herb Baumeister became a dangerous serial killer, he was a respected member of his community. He was a good husband and a good father. He was lively and often hosted great parties. However, people were unaware that behind his pleasant demeanor lay a hidden illness called schizophrenia, which he had developed at a young age. Due to this illness, he took the lives of 24 people and buried them on his property. His house, located in Indiana, was called Fox Hollow Farm. When people from the surrounding community started disappearing, fingers began pointing towards him during the investigation. As soon as he realized this, he fled his home and ended his life by committing suicide. Before his death, he left a note explaining the reasons for his suicide, mentioning that his business was failing and his marriage was falling apart. However, he made no mention of the murders he had committed. All the secrets were buried with him, and the investigating team could not determine how many people he had actually killed. During the investigation, when his property was searched, they found fragments of 5,000 human bones. If you still wish to watch this video, you are most welcome. But first, listen to the names of these characters. The serial killer is Herb Baumeister. This is Mr. Rob. And this is his wife, Vicky Grapes. This is Mr. Joe, who works with Rob at their car dealership. 10 years after Herb Baumeister's story, a new twist emerges when two people come to buy Fox Hollow Farm. Shortly after moving in, strange events begin to occur in the house. Due to these events, the owner recorded an audio that was so terrifying that it went viral on social media as soon as it was uploaded. In 2006, Mr. Rob, his wife, Vicky, and their 2 sons moved to Fox Hollow Farm in Indiana, unaware of its dark history. The house was surprisingly affordable due to its notorious past of a serial killer. But still, they decided to buy it and move in, initially enjoying their new life there. They loved the house, especially the swimming pool, which their sons enjoyed. However, the children had a habit of getting dirty and jumping into the pool. One day, while Vicky was vacuuming the dirt around the pool, the vacuum suddenly stopped working and its plug came out of the socket. She thought she might have accidentally pulled the cord, so she plugged it back in and resumed cleaning. But the vacuum stopped again, startling her. She was sure she hadn't touched the cord this time, but the plug had somehow come out and was lying about a foot away from the socket. She plugged it back in, double-checked the connection, and started vacuuming again, this time keeping an eye on the socket. To her shock, the plug suddenly popped out of the socket and flew through the air before landing on the ground. Terrified, she left the vacuum there and walked away. Meanwhile, Mr. Rob suggested his employee Joe to move into an apartment near their house, which was available for rent, so he could go to work on time. A few days later, Mr. Joe moved into the apartment, and Mr. Rob helped him with the movement. That night, Mr. Joe had a nightmare in which he was being chased by something. In his sleep, he got up and started walking towards the door, eventually colliding with it and falling. He cut his hand on a glass while falling and woke up, confused about how he had ended up there. A few days later, Vicky noticed Mr. Rob painting a corner of the house. As they talked, Vicky saw a man in a red shirt standing in the woods, watching them. When she pointed him out to Mr. Rob, the man turned and disappeared into the woods. Mr. Rob tried to reassure Vicky, saying that people would naturally be curious about them since they were living in a house with such a dark history. Later that night, Mr. Joe was at his apartment when he heard knocking on his door. He called out, asking the person to wait, but the knocking grew louder. When he opened the door, no one was there. He looked around, but saw nothing. As he returned inside, he noticed his dog growling at something in the room. He turned on the lights, but found nothing. Mr. Joe decided to take his dog, Fred, for a walk. As they walked, he noticed that the lights at Mr. Rob's house were off, so he assumed they were asleep. While walking, Fred suddenly ran towards the bushes on the other side of the road. Mr. Joe followed and saw a man in a red shirt under the streetlight. The man disappeared, and Fred ran after him. Mr. Joe, worried for his dog, chased after Fred into the woods. He found Fred growling at something, and when he turned around, he saw the man in the red shirt standing behind him. Terrified, Mr. Joe ran back home with Fred and locked the doors. They all began to believe that the spirits of Herb Baumeister's victims were haunting the property. They researched the victims online and found photos of some of them. Mr. Joe recognized one of the photos as the man he had seen in his apartment. They concluded that the spirits were trying to communicate with them. A few days later, Mr. Joe decided to revisit the bushes where he had seen the man in the red shirt. During the day, he found a human leg bone lying on the leaves. He speculated that it might have been missed during the investigation. He shared this discovery with Mr. Rob and Vicky, and they decided to contact the detective handling the case. The detective arrived and explained that most of the murders had occurred near the pool area, where Herb Baumeister would lure his victims. The detective also mentioned that Herb had placed mannequins dressed in party clothes around the pool, which added to the eerie atmosphere. Mr. Rob and Vicky were horrified, realizing that their children often swam in the same pool. Later, while working on his computer, Mr. Joe heard a scratching sound from the kitchen. He found all the knives arranged in a straight line on the sink. As he turned to leave, he noticed fresh cut marks on the kitchen shelf. He believed that one of the victims was trying to tell him that they had been killed with a knife in that very spot. Determined to uncover the truth, Mr. Joe started recording audio in the kitchen, asking if anyone was there. He asked 3 times and heard nothing, but when he listened to the recording, he heard a voice respond, "The married one."
Who keeps walking in the kitchen?
This confused him, as all the known victims were single. So who was this married person? It was none other than